have noticed that retro-style first-person shooters are quite popular. You may more commonly call them boomer shooters. Now in my mind, it's because they have lots of guns that go boom.
Just give me that!
Though it's really just because they're the shooters older gamers tend to like. There's one company above all others who are making a bunch of these with an astonishing level of quality and a liberating process of development and publishing. And you've probably never even heard of them. Except maybe that time they threatened to murder a puppy.
You see this puppy? I will drown this puppy!
I've spoken to some of the key developers to understand how they work, what their intentions are, and why all the means. This is the story of New Blood Interactive, the game publisher who do things a bit differently. Let's play a little game. Open up a browser right now and Google notfortnite.com. Go on, I'll wait. Yep, it brings you to the homepage of New Blood's breakthrough hit Dusk. But why?
So we didn't have a website, so I was just, we tried to think of something funny. And I was like, what if we wrote like, Fortnite was really big at the time. We were like, what if we just made the website notfortnite.com? And we did, and it got like shared so many times. Nowadays it's kind of like, can you market and advertise your game in 3 words or less? Notbloodborne.com, thiefwithguns.com. These things that are not only funny, but they're very descriptive, and you know exactly what you're getting, even just from a URL.
New Blood are a publisher that just doesn't do things in the traditional way. They lean into the ridiculous side of online culture and aren't interested in following the rulebook. Their games don't try to go with modern trends. In fact, quite the opposite. From the outset, New Blood has set out to create games that hark back to the good old days, plugging gaps in the market and reigniting genres which have been long abandoned by the big publishers. So where did this all come from? Well, it all began in the heart of New York, in Dave Oshry's bedroom, quite some time ago.
And I made Wolf 3D maps on the Mac version of the Mac Play version of Wolf 3D, and I tried to package them on floppy disks and sell them in AOL chat rooms. I was also selling pirated software. I was selling like pirated copies of Dark Forces in AOL chat rooms. I didn't know that was illegal until someone actually sent me a check to my mother's house, and she made me send it back.
So yeah, he always had the instinct for it. I mean, when I was 8, I was still struggling to colour inside the lines. This kid was starting his own video game smuggling ring. Illegal, yes, but impressive. So Oshry loved Wolfenstein. So much so, he was willing to break the law for it. And it's no surprise that the rest of New Blood have that same spark for the genre.
And one day I went over to a friend's house and he had this black and white 3D game where you were moving through hallways and shooting Nazis, and I was like, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. That game was obviously Wolf 3D. And I think that was a pivotal moment for me, because ever since then I just wanted to make first-person shooters.
And then all of a sudden Wolfenstein 3D came out, and then a year later you had Doom, and this jump in technology was just insane.
Duke Nukem 3D, Doom of course is probably the biggest one, Blood, Quake.
Doom and Quake. And also this lesser-known Ukrainian game called Chasm the Rift, and was a sort of Eurojank Slav Clunk Quake clone, but it was the first game I ever bought with my own money.
So where did they come from? How do a bunch of people just come together and decide, hey, let's resurrect a genre? New Blood itself was formed in 2014, but its creation was actually a step in the chain reaction that started way back in 1987 with the formation of Apogee Software. They made a whole bunch of games that you've probably never heard of. What you will have heard of is what happened in 1996, when Apogee created a sister company called 3D Realms, and dropped a little game called Duke Nukem 3D. .3D Realms' success with the Duke meant the scrappy younger brother soon outgrew Apogee, and the original company was left at the wayside. That was until 2008, when someone called Terry Naga acquired the licensing rights to Apogee and their IPs. And one of them in particular is vital in establishing the idea behind New Blood Interactive. You may not have played the 2013 Rise of the Triad remake, and I wouldn't blame you. It was fun, sure, but also very janky. It was an attempt to bring the core features of the OG first-person shooters in line with modern gamers' expectations. What you have to remember is, at that time, games like this just weren't being made.
Back in around the 2010s, we were deep into the Call of Duty, carry 2 weapons at a time, hide to heal, shooters. Technically, it's credited as the first, boomer shooter, retro FPS, in the cycle of games that have now come back. And then Shadow Warrior got a reboot, and then Wolfenstein got a reboot, and then Doom got a reboot. And now we are completely 100% back to shooters like they used to make in the 90s.
For Osprey 2, Rise of the Triad was a sliding doors moment. Not only was it the first time that New Blood Interactive had been seen anywhere, but it brought together some of the people that would go on to make the publisher what it is today. Which makes what happened next a little bit strange.
At the time, VR was really taking off. It was around 2014. And at that time, it was really cool. Let's make a VR game. And we started, what do we want to make? We're like, I want to make Punch-Out. I want Punch-Out VR. I want to just, like old school Nintendo, like Super Punch-Out's one of my favorite games from that era. And I was like, I want to do that in VR. I want really silly characters and silly attacks with crazy sound effects, Punch-Out, right? And we were getting pretty close on it. We were in some high-level talks with Oculus, but it never really materialized. It wasn't really going fast enough for us to focus on it full time.
So with a VR game not able to make its way out the door, Osprey went back to what he knew best. And luckily, it was a chance DM that changed absolutely everything.
And I get a random DM from this guy named David Szymanski. And he's like, hey, I'm a huge fan. And he's like, hey, I want you to check out my game.
So I first knew about Dave from Twitter back in 2015 or something like that. I was really just like, maybe if I send this guy this early tech build I have, maybe he'll tweet about it and get me a few more followers or whatever.
And it was Dusk. He sent me we've since released this build. It was a one-room build of Dusk.
The demo wasn't even anything very good. There wasn't even really much in the way of gameplay. It was just sort of big area with a whole bunch of interaction thing, like opening the cupboards. You could turn lights on and off. You could light fires and throw stuff around. And there was, 4 or 5 placeholder enemies in the first room that you could shoot.
The interactivity, the movement, the shooting, it was all there. The bones of Dusk. And I was like, this is amazing. I really want to work with you. And he was like, what, really? He was like, I don't believe you. And I literally flew. I was like, come to QuakeCon. David had never been on a plane before. I'll fly you and your wife to meet me at QuakeCon, and I will convince you that I am serious and I really want to work on this game with you, and I am not kidding, and I am not trying to scam you.
This simple mechanical build of Szymanski's game lit a fire underneath Osprey. He knew what his fledgling company was going to be. They weren't going to make VR games, and they weren't going to go and chase trends, certainly. They were going to make old school shooters. But he needed help. And from working on Rise of the Triad, he knew exactly who he needed to call in.
I had worked with Andrew Holschult on, he did the soundtrack for Rise of the Triad 2013, obviously, and he was like, and I asked him if he wanted to do the soundtrack for Dusk.
He emailed me and said, hey, I've got this interesting game from a guy named David Szymanski that I think you should take a look at. I think was his exact words. And I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds cool. And showed it to me, and I was just like, holy cow, man. Like, this is the blueprint. Like, this is I can already see this.
So, the team was set, and the project was Dusk. Only problem was, how the hell were they going to fund this? In the days of OG shooters, games were distributed through a shareware model. The first part of the game was free. You'd play it, get hooked, and then write to the publisher with a check, and they'd send you a floppy disk with the rest of the game.
And I was like, we need to make a full-ass game here with episodes and tell a story. But I don't know anything about making games, but I know if we just do it brick by brick, front to back, make one level at a time, we can make a good game.
A big part of how New Blood operates is putting a vertical slice out early in some form, generally early access at this point, and then just paying close attention to whatever people are saying, good or bad, and taking that information, integrating that in with further development of the game.
Early access allowed the 3-person team to work on the game in their own time, whilst having enough money coming in to keep the company going. Basically, it's the modern-day version of shareware, with much less of the faff. Dusk's arrival on Steam Early Access was a sensation. Word quickly spread about this new shooter with old-school sensibilities and an incredibly robust set of mechanics. From the outset, it was an absolute blast to play, with the added promise of new content coming in the future. It really is easy to see why people got so excited. To be honest with you, I was one of them. It's the main reason I wanted to do this video, so I can spend 5 minutes explaining why Dusk might just be the best first-person shooter ever made. Let's address the elephant in the room first, the looks. You'll notice that Dusk is an obvious homage to the early 3D graphics of the games it's trying to ape.
I was really, really struck by Quake and Chasm and those sort of games, and especially the visuals, because I spent a bunch of time, since I couldn't code a game on my own, or a FPS on my own. I spent a lot of time just designing one on paper, and most of the design for that didn't make it into the final game. But a few things did. The big one was the visuals, because even back before they were trendy and retro, I just loved how it looked. There was something about that blocky, gritty aesthetic that it spoke to me.
But that choice is used to remarkable effect. By leaning into a certain visual style, Dusk's environments and enemies are dripping with atmosphere. The best example are these absolute monstrosities, the horrors. Uncanny humanoid things that look like something from Attack on Titan. Render these in modern day graphics and they'd be unsettling, sure. But somehow they're even worse in this gritty style, because your brain has to just fill in those gaps. Oh god, just make them go away, please. But shooters can't live on visuals alone. Mechanically, Dusk is about as good as it gets. From the earliest demo, you can feel how tactile and responsive the controls are, how smooth every animation is, and how satisfying the gunplay is as well. It's absolutely no wonder that Oshry and Holshot were this excited based on that demo alone. Szymanski would go on to build something genuinely remarkable. Very unusually for this type of game, it actually gets better the further you go on. The levels become more ambitious, bolder, more insane. From the earthy, realistic opening levels, through weird industrial facilities to science laboratories in the sky, Dusk isn't afraid to get more audacious as it goes. That's really a result of how the game's development progressed. The team kept wanting to outdo themselves, and fans came to expect that too.
We had put out episode 1 and people really liked it. And then it took us an extra year to finish the multiplayer in episode 3 because the expectations were so high and we were like, we have to stick the landing. And we were running out of ideas. By the time we got to the middle of episode 3, David's like, I don't know what to make these levels about.
I had to come up with all of these weird different ways to do new different things. It started to be like, well, now it has to go all weird and surreal. I think actually the real catalyst for this, it was Escher Labs. And the funny thing about Escher Labs is they were never supposed to be like that. The only idea I had for that level was I was like, oh, I want to get some like Half-Life vibes in here with the labs and stuff like that. And then I started making it and I was like, this is so boring. So like, I don't know, how am I going to even make this level when I'm not interested in it? And so I was like, okay, well, what if we just start putting things on the walls and the ceiling and just make it like this topsy-turvy thing? And that's the decision then that ended up tormenting me in episode 3, having to try and one-up the Escher Labs for 10 levels.
But it really is in this last chapter where that one-upmanship comes to the fore. Every level is a tour de force of design and spectacle. A metal cathedral, an entire city exists seemingly underground, pulsating and creeping. A church gets destroyed by a tornado made of human meat. A set of sky islands can literally be flipped around and navigated through 360 degrees. It's all just phenomenal. Same goes for the story. Dusk follows the principles of its forebears by only hinting at its story as you go. It's showing, not telling. You might assume this is all done by design. Well, not exactly.
The story for Dusk was such a write it as you go sort of thing, because he took all of this stuff from the other parts of the game through all these tiny little changes and stuff. And so by the end, Dave is the one who really wrote the story by the end.
However, this actually worked in its favour and allowed New Blood to form a cohesive narrative from the initial clues they put in the game's early levels. It's worth actually understanding the final narrative of the game to appreciate this. Spoiler warning, by the way. You spend the whole game seeing hints at something far greater than yourself, dictating what's going on in the world of Dusk, and you're told about a cult leader named Jacob. You see meat being processed regularly and this strange green energy lightning seemingly powering something. As things get weirder and more bombastic, this intensifies until the climactic finale sees you face off against this cult leader, powered by that green energy, in a one-on-one duel that's basically a fight against yourself. You don't actually kill him though. Once he gets down to about 20% of his health, some of the game's previous enemies spawn in to finish the job for you. Hooray, you win! Now ascend towards the light and escape. Or actually, no. Instead, you have to fight a nightmare creature from the Lovecraft universe, voiced by the guy who played Caleb from Blood. Again, you might think this was all planned, but nope. The inspiration actually came from a surprising source.
We didn't even have a bad guy until halfway through development. I think somebody in the Discord was like, I bet Nyarlathotep is the big bad at the end of the game. And I was like, who's that? I googled Nyarlathotep. I'm like, that works. Sure, he's the eldritch horror at the end of the game. Ship it. We literally just were making stuff up. So we were just trying to come up with fun, cool stuff. We don't have any design documents. We don't have any pillars to our games. We just kind of make what we think is cool.
The other thing players were noticing was the sound design, because it was incredible. Take the game's iconic enemy, for example, the Wendigos. I mean, they're creepy enough as it is, but without this noise, they just would not be the same. That one single noise has far more impact than the thousands of sounds going on at any one time in most AAA shooters. Every gun just sounds so viscerally loud. Every enemy makes noises that are as gruesome as they are unsettling. Remember those horror guys? Just listen to how they die. Ah, God, why did I bring them back? But the pièce de résistance is the OST. Its influences are very apparent, but it's the design and implementation of it that really sticks the landing.
When Dusk was getting started, a bunch of the influences that I really wanted to bring to the table had to do with the era specific of what music was trending around that time. And when I say that time, I mean like original Quake, Blood, that kind of stuff. And I know that, hey, Trent Reznor did the original Quake. Why can't that be a source of inspiration? And obviously taking a look at hey, what New Doom is doing is pretty cool too. Can we spice that up a little bit? But that was kind of already in my DNA a little bit, like that super heavy, aggressive, kind of metal stuff. So mixing all of those together and finding some really good vibes is important.
From the atmospheric background tracks like Ashes to Ashes and the way it bends in on itself in Beautiful Blasphemy, to the ball-busting metal of Departure to Destruction, Erebus Reactor, and my personal favourite, Murder Machine Incorporated. Every track nails what it sets out to do, and is this beautifully thick layer of icing on Dusk's delicious cake. If you've played Doom 2016, you'll know just how important music is to shooters like this. In Hull Shoal, New Blood found the best person for the job. In fact, because of Dusk, he got called up to produce the Doom Eternal DLC after id and Mick Gordon fell out. So yeah, Dusk is pretty much as good as it gets, and it served to feed audiences that were starved of good old-fashioned balls-to-the-wall shooters. The game officially released in 1.0 on the 10th of December 2018. New Blood Interactive were ready to share their final vision for Dusk with the masses.
During that development cycle in early access leading up, there was all kinds of good vibes. We were having a lot of interaction. I was having fun. Every day it was log in, talk to somebody. Yeah, we were having a ton of fun, and we were like, man, what's this release going to look like?
There was a certain amount of confidence going into release, but we had no idea how it was going to sell on the first day. And because the game was so well received, and because this was like our big launch, we're gonna have like a Steam pop-up, we're gonna have like, it's big, who knows, it could go really big and stuff. And so for most of that day, before we could see sales numbers, it was sort of like celebration time.
I remember like waiting on Valve to like launch the game. Then you finally launch the game like 2 hours late. It comes out, it does okay, right? It sells like, I think 1,200 copies, which is not a lot of copies. Like, it's not a bad amount of copies, but like, that's not enough for a company to continue, you know?
Dave was freaking out. Dave, Oshry was kind of like, oh my God. Which in turn made David go, oh my God. Which in turn made me go, oh my God.
That's it. We're done. Like, New Blood is done, and it was a depressing time. It was the end of Dusk release day was not, and the day following that was not a happy time, as it probably should have been.
Several years of hard work, excitement from a dedicated fan base, serious financial investment, and the final outcome was apparent failure. But hang on, why have I spent all this time talking about a game that flopped on launch? Well, to the surprise of the team and Valve, that week release was actually the start of something much bigger.
And then we woke up, and then it did the same number of copies. In fact, I think it did 1,000 more the next day, and then it did even more the next day, and it just kept going.
Gradually, this picture emerged of like, oh no, that wasn't all we're going to sell. People like the game. The algorithm likes the game. The game has very good word of mouth.
And then it kept selling that amount of copies every day for like the next 30 days. It sold, and then the reviews started coming in. You know, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 8.5, 9 out of 10. Ended up with like, I think at the time it was like a 91 on Metacritic or something like that. And we were like, oh shit, I guess we can keep doing this.
Dusk had just done something that no one had ever seen before from a Steam Early Access game. Rather than dropping its 1.0 and watching the numbers roll in, the release was essentially drip-feeding the new fans and capital every single day. And that gave New Blood the stability that very few indies get, and the freedom to drop their next banger shortly after. This is a Medieval. On the surface, it's pretty similar to Dusk. First person, late 90s graphics, single player arena shooter. It's all there. But you only need to peel away the top layer to realize that this game is a very different beast. A Medieval is something its developers have been working on long before meeting up with Dave and New Blood, as far back as 1993.
You know, when we were kids, we were making Doom mods, Doom levels and that. We came up with the name Medieval as a Doom mod.
Yeah.
And all it was really was just like a title screen with like zodiac symbols on it, and maybe like half a level. And then later on, Evil, we kind of wanted to make a top-down game where you were like a action character and you had like a sword that would change forms. I had like documents with stuff written down and just ideas, and we just cherry-picked stuff from that.
There's a very obvious comparison to be made between Dusk and a Medieval, being their own respective Doom and Hexen or Heretic. But a Medieval really does have its own unique style.
For like the level design, you know, like the environments you're in, we wanted to make a few different settings, and just along the way we came up with more ideas as it went.
didn't have a grand vision. It grew from we want to make this genre of game look like kind of like as if a 95 game was made now.
The game is split into 7 completely unique sets of levels, each with its own distinct style and unique enemies. It's always exciting to discover just what's next and what you'll be up against when you get there. And the reason why all this exists is actually due to an unusual quirk in the game's design.
The way like a medieval looks and like the whole like kind of atmosphere and we're going for art style, it literally came from like me doing a test to test out the viability of doing sprite weapons that look 3D. Like that was the whole
basis.
That was the whole basis of the game. Yeah. Like it was having done that, like proof of concept. That it basically became the idea for the game. We were like, we need to make a game with sprite weapons that use, you know, modern, like normal map kind of graphics.
That's right. The weapons aren't actually 3D models. They're 2D sprites. These weapons are flat textures. The game only has 7 of them, but each one just feels great to use. And enemies are designed with each one of them in mind. There's a mace that propels crystals that stake enemies into walls, a launcher that shoots actual planets out of the solar system, and even a freaking black hole launcher. Yeah, a medieval is awesome. Once again, it's got incredibly impressive music and sound design, but very, very different to Dusk. It's moody, atmospheric, sometimes even sad, and you'll never guess who did it all.
Leon had this idea for a fantasy game, and the proof of concepts and stuff that he built out, I was really impressed by. I was like, I can't believe that 2 people are building all this stuff out.
The cool thing with the music with Andrew was I went to Andrew and I was like,
you know what
you can do, right? I'm like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, I'm not going to give you any, like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, like all the other things he'd worked on.
Yeah.
I'm just like, what do you think this should, you know, be like for this game? And he made some demos and I was just like, yes,
exactly.
I was like, this is great.
Yeah,
dude, I love it.
He got it immediately.
I kind of wanted some of the blend from like, you know, Skyrim, also mixed with like, you know, some like more cinematic, ethereal, like orchestral stuff, but also influences from like Deus Ex and like the early Unreal, you know, all those tracker soundtracks that you hear from back in the day.
I mean, just listen to this. It genuinely makes me well up. It's amazing how it feels so fresh, despite harking back to gaming's roots. Dusk is exactly the same. These nostalgic shooters may come across as just doughy-eyed old farts wanting a return to the good old days of FPS games, but that's just so far from the case. I mean, one of New Blood's games isn't an FPS at all.
So we had done Dusk in a Medieval, and David introduced me to Dylan, who was, you know, doing Gloomwood. And he had been working on, he had actually been wanting to pitch it to us for a really long time. And I was like, yeah, I'd love to work on this with you.
So the idea of pitching an immersive sim to Dave was kind of like, I don't know if this is going to work. Like I joked to David that I was like, yeah, you know, this is gonna be great. Let me just pitch to Dave, like, oh, here's a game I've got. It's a genre that's sort of like the videotape from The Ring, where you make a game like this and then your studio dies 7 days later. So I pitched it to Dave, and he liked it, and the company liked it.
A Victorian steampunk stealth horror immersive sim. Rolls off the tongue, eh? New Blood's answer to Thief and System Shock. As you might imagine, it's some undertaking.
Immersive sims are known to be fairly complicated projects, and I made a lot of little games before Gloomwood, but this was like my biggest project since then. It was horrifically overscoped for a single person. Making an immersive sim is notoriously difficult because you have so many interconnected systems. Things will silently explode on you the moment you change code in one part of the code base, and it reverberates and just destroys things in other parts of the code base you had no idea could affect it.
Like other New Blood games before it, Gloomwood seems to be coming at exactly the right time. The immersive sim genre is seeing a revival, with titles like Blood West, Shadows of Doubt, and that System Shock remake, all receiving critical and commercial success. There's also a clamour for the kind of eldritch horror that has been underserved in the past.
I've always been like a gothic horror fan, like Dracula, and I really enjoyed sort of 1800s and gothic horror literature. Bloodborne came out and was like just a collection of just such great elements of like Lovecraft horror and you know, werewolves and gothic horror that then I started leaning a bit more into that sort of aesthetic.
New Blood have gone down the same route as their other games in launching it in early access because, well, it worked before, but Dylan wasn't too enamoured with this idea that David posed to him at first.
When he first suggested it, I was unsure because early access had a reputation prior to like sort of Dusk doing that. It had this reputation of people would put their games out, never finish them, and people would just essentially be like, oh, it's a scam. I was sort of wary about sort of labeling Gloomwood as that.
But his fears were unfounded. And after players got their hands on the game, word of mouth soon followed. This was the Thief game that other publishers refused to make. Plus, there's more. Ultra Kill, their most commercially successful project to date, a roguelike arena shooter with some of the tightest controls I've ever experienced. And Fallen Aces, an FPS that looks like a 90s comic book and is set in the roaring 20s, with all the suave and style you'd expect from that generation. Every single one of these games is absolutely stellar. How many publishers can stand by the claim that every single one of their games is of this level of quality? And how many of those publishers are manned by just a few people?
It was just friends of friends. Like, we've never like taken a game pitch. We've never hired anybody. We've never fired anybody. It's all just been like, hey man, my friend wants to work on this thing. Can you think he can try? I was like, yeah, sure. You know, it's just a very iterative back and forth design process between friends that really like working together. And, you know, that's the most important thing. People ask me all the time, what's the secret to New Blood? I'm like, we're friends. We are literally just friends. Like, New Blood developer chat is my group chat. You know, like, yeah, I'm your boss, but I'm also your friend. I'm your boss, but I'm also your friend. I'm your friend, but don't forget I'm your boss.
New Blood Interactive shouldn't work. A group of mates from around the world without any real organisational structure, developing titles without broad appeal, and little to no financial backing to safeguard the process. It really should have failed, and yet, despite all odds, here we are, discussing one of the most phenomenal publishers to emerge from the last decade.
Dusk and New Blood have had a probably incalculable impact on me. Dusk is a very special game to me. That concept was really special to me before I ever put the first line of code down for Dusk. Like, for years before even starting work on Dusk, like, that game existed in my head. Like, that was a lot of me that was put into that. That was brewing in my head for a long time. And so finishing Dusk was a big moment, and it still remains a big moment.
Prior to joining New Blood, I don't feel like I fit in anywhere. Like, I never felt like I fit into like the AAA scene. I didn't feel like they were making the stuff that I wanted to make. And it was kind of discovering David and like the group of people that were into these like retro shooters and old school games that I started for the first time feeling like, hey, these are the people that are doing what I want to do.
I'd say the biggest thing it's done is I work from home and I make enough to like, live comfortably.
Do whatever you want to do. That's the thing.
And I think honestly, it's shown that we can make things that people want to play, and you know, devote our time to that.
Dave and David like have been just such an integral part of my success that like I'm not sure that anything would have come after had Dusk not been a success. Like I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be working in games anymore.
I guess you could even say I don't even know what the indie FPS landscape would look like if not for Dusk and New Blood. It just so happened Dusk came at the right time and did end up sort of setting the tone and the style in a lot of ways for what came. Yeah, it's kind of incalculable. I don't know what my life would look like now if Dusk hadn't happened, if it hadn't happened as a New Blood game. That's really all because of this years ago legwork that New Blood did. That foundation was set by Dusk and by New Blood and Dave's effort they put into pushing that game.
Working with New Blood has been massive for me because it's not only given me an opportunity to make this game way larger and more robust than I would ever be able to do it on my own, but I've also been lucky to be able to work with a bunch of people that I really like working with. It's been challenging in a good way. It's not been like we're not all at each other's throats the entire time. We're all in the trenches together, and but we're having fun with it.
This community lies at the absolute heart of everything New Blood do. It's how each of its key figures got the chance to develop their dream game. It's how their collaborative work environment flourished, how each of their games found its audience, and how that audience drove their games to be something better. But even more than that, working with a community away from corporate interference, whether that be online or locally, or even with your closest friends, it's all just so much more enjoyable.
The trick is it's fun. I've worked at places where it's not fun, and I know there's a lot of developers who like you don't want to work at the big studio with 400 people. It's not fun. It's a lot of meetings and meetings. If you are blessed enough to work with your friends and your friends happen to be good at making games, that's the place to be. Like I don't want to do anything else but this.
Dave Oshry really does lie at the heart of all this. He gambled everything to get New Blood to where it is now. But he couldn't have done it alone. David Szymanski virtually broke himself to get Dusk out the door. Dylan Rogers is now finding himself in a similar situation with Gloomwood. Leon Zawada and Simon Rance needed 30 years and one hell of a work ethic to produce something as remarkable as a Medieval. And absolutely none of this would have been possible without the astonishing emergence of Andrew Holsholt, already one of gaming's most significant music producers. If you haven't got the message already, go now and pick up some of their games. You'll rarely find a more guaranteed good decision than to play a New Blood title. And in the process, you'll be doing the developers and the world of gaming in general a huge favour. We need more publishers like these guys. As they say themselves, they just want to make cool shit for the cool cats who want to play it. Evidently, I'm not one of them. Oh, also, there's Big John.
Do it! Come on, kill me! Curly man! Good talk! Come on, kill me! Kill me! Kill me! Come on! Kill me! Come on! Kill me! That's all you got. Do it! Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on!